Before we start, I want to thank you for tuning in. If you're enjoying this content and would like to stay up to date with new episodes, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and turn the notifications button on. And if you'd like to support this content, then I would appreciate a review or comment if you're listening to this on a podcast platform. Enjoy.
And that's the theme of burnout. One of my friends and podcast followers actually once told me she got an advice from a person she looks up to as a mentor, and he told her the day she should take a break is the day she dies. And I think that's the craziest advice I've ever heard. If that's the world we live in today, then that's pretty dangerous, because what value are you going to bring into this world if you are physically and emotionally drained? There's a difference between having grit and hard work and giving yourself a much needed break to get your energy and your inspiration back. And career burnout is also a theme that I have been experiencing in my life recently, so I thought it's just the perfect time to talk about this theme.
Welcome to a new season of the One Day Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Al-Majali, and each week I'm here to discuss powerful concepts around business, mindset, or life, and often share the stage with some of the brightest and most interesting minds of the Middle East to help me do so. Happy to have you here. Enjoy this one.
I'm dedicating this episode to a theme that I have been asked from a couple of people who have been following my work to do a podcast on, and that's the theme of burnout. One of my friends and podcast followers actually once told me she got an advice from a person she looks up to as a mentor, and he told her the day she should take a break is the day she dies. And I think that's the craziest advice I've ever heard. If that's the world we live in today, then that's pretty dangerous, because what value are you going to bring into this world if you are physically and emotionally drained? There's a difference between having grit and hard work and giving yourself a much needed break to get your energy and your inspiration back. And career burnout is also a theme that I have been experiencing in my life recently, so I thought it's just the perfect time to talk about this theme. So let's talk a bit about what burnout means and the ways we could deal with it before it develops into a bigger problem. Since burnout can affect our physical and mental health if we don't acknowledge or treat it the right way or early on. So the term burnout is a symptom that we experience as a result of chronic or long-term stress we typically experience from our workplace or due to one's career. But it's also a general term that covers all aspects of life, meaning it's this feeling of being constantly exhausted, swamped, or overwhelmed from keeping up with work, social activities, family duties. But the biggest driver or the main trigger tends to be from our workplace, because that's where we spend most of our days and most of our time in. We spend it in the office or in front of a laptop, working remotely, interacting with colleagues, fulfilling our work deadlines, responding to emails. It's a lot. And this is definitely what I have been feeling earlier this year. I was experiencing burnout because I was doing too much. I had my day job, I was running this podcast, I was leading also the operations of an early stage startup in the tech world, doing that part-time. So my weeks were crazy to say the least. And that took a toll on me physically and emotionally, and I'll talk more about some of the particular symptoms and the drivers for my situation further down in the episode. So let's talk about the signs of a burnout. But before I talk about the signs of a burnout, let's be clear that experiencing a burnout doesn't happen immediately. It's typically a gradual process that builds with stressors from our job, and the signs and symptoms can be subtle at first, but the longer they go unaddressed, the worse they can become, which can lead to a breakdown, and you do not want to reach that point. So symptom number one, that's the obvious one, and it's feeling fatigued over a prolonged period of time. So you might be feeling like you want to sleep all day, you have no energy to work, or to socialize, or to do the things that you enjoy doing. So that's the first sign, and that's the very obvious sign. Number two, lack of productivity and inspiration. That's definitely something I struggled with, and I was suffering from when I was experiencing burnout in my last job. I was someone who was constantly motivated, ready to do more, take on more responsibilities. But I reached a point where I was feeling extremely unmotivated, uninspired, and just doing tasks for the sake of doing tasks. And that was so out of character for me. That was alarming to me because I was not used to essentially feeling this way. and I was struggling to also find the inspiration in my side passion projects. So that burnout that I was experiencing in my day job was spilling over into my life and passion projects. A third symptom of burnout is feeling disconnected from work. So we all get these days when we're pulling ourselves out of bed to work, or when we're questioning whether we're fulfilled with what we're doing. However, what I mean here by feeling disconnected from work is this feeling when you're questioning whether what you're doing is adding value to your life, or when you've been asking yourself for a long time, what's the point of what I'm doing? Until when am I gonna do what I'm doing? If this has been a theme in your life, then it might be worth questioning your position with your work and whether that could be a subtle sign of a burnout. A fourth symptom, and that is also not an obvious one, but it's a change in sleep patterns. When I was experiencing the burnout and I was in the midst of it all, I would often find it hard to go to sleep, or more often than not, I would actually find myself waking up in the middle of the night, sweating and having that feeling of anxiety and not really understanding why or what was the reason of that anxiety. But looking back now, I understand it largely had to do with the fact that I was just unhappy at work and I was extremely tired from work. A last and fifth symptom, there are way more symptoms, but I'll just stop at that. And it's work-life balance. When your work-life balance is out of sync, when you feel like your work is taking over your life and that it's the main activity in your life and your life revolves around your work, then this is a situation that you need to look at. And this situation actually has become more prevalent since COVID and since remote work arrangements, because a lot of people who were working online were complaining, feeling like the boundaries between work and life were blurring, and that they were working more hours than usual since they're at home and they were more accessible online. Now that I've mentioned some of the major symptoms of a burnout, it might be worth checking in with yourself to see whether you've been feeling one or a combination of these symptoms over a long period of time. That could be an indicator of you experiencing burnout without you even realizing it. Or maybe you do recognize those symptoms, but you refuse to admit to yourself that you're experiencing a burnout because you're a hard worker or someone who's used to work and not rest, and that used to be me, so I get it. But it doesn't harm checking in with yourself every once in a while to see where you stand with your job, with your career, with your life, and whether burnout is present. Because if it's present, then you need to do something about it. And it might be worth noting here that there's a difference between burnout and depression. They share similar symptoms, but with burnout, the drivers and the reasons are obvious. But for depression, it's kind of more generic. Meaning for burnout, if you remove yourself from your workplace situation, you will automatically experience a difference almost instantly. But with depression, it's more of a long-term and a more complicated process. So since we're touching on this, let's talk about the drivers and the causes of a burnout. Some of the reasons are more obvious than others, but here's a list of major ones. 1, unmanageable workloads or unreasonable deadlines. This is an obvious one. But when you're really being exposed to stressful and unreasonable work expectations and environment for a long period of time and it's not seasonal, then a burnout is bound to happen. And honestly, I experienced a lot of that during my first job in consulting. And that seems to be the norm in worlds like consulting and law. So people tend to just go on with it and not question the health and the sanity of these work environments, or not giving themselves enough break. But when you are faced with this situation, then that could easily be a driver for a burnout, and you might need to look out for that. Another less obvious reason that could be contributing to a burnout is if you're facing an unfair treatment at work. Meaning when you feel like you're constantly being targeted, or that your colleagues are being treated better than you for no justifiable reason, then that could cause you to feel demotivated, unwanted, and these feelings tend to drain our energy and can cause a burnout. Similar to this last point that I had just mentioned, that could also be a cause of a burnout is lack of support from your work environment, whether that be from your boss, from your colleagues. And here I'm talking about not having a support system or someone you could talk to or vent to or relate to. That could also be a trigger or a catalyst for you experiencing some sort of a burnout at work. The fourth reason for a burnout could be due to working in a negative or a demotivating work environment. And that's honestly something that I can speak to since I've experienced it in my last job. I had worked for an organization for almost 4 years, and my first 3 years were amazing. However, during the fourth year, the organization was undergoing some major restructure. I lost 2 bosses in less than a year. We had new entities and new teams merge with ours, and almost everyone in the workplace was feeling down and anxious. They were not happy with the new leadership and management. And imagine walking into this work environment every morning and spending your 9 to 5 there, where everyone's negative, everyone's feeling down. That will definitely affect you, whether at a conscious or subconscious level. So if you're faced with this situation, it might be worth being mindful of that. One last reason I have on my list, and this one could be counterintuitive, but it's also a driver for a burnout. And that's when your work is underwhelming, meaning when you are not being challenged enough or learning enough. That could be de-incentivizing for you to look forward to work. And over a long period of time, you might feel like you're not accomplishing much as a person, and that might impact your work morale and might put you in a space where you're just tired and you're exhausted. Now that we've talked about some of the major drivers of a burnout, the major symptoms of a burnout, let's talk about some practical solutions to mitigate that and to deal with that situation. And obviously some of those solutions I have researched, and some of those solutions I actually have applied in my situation, and they were definitely helping out. And in this podcast, I share things based on research, or I share things based on personal experiences if they have helped me out. So number one is take a break. Obvious one, but I mean here a long break, not a week break, at least a three-week break, because you need this as a circuit breaker. You could even consider taking a sabbatical from your work if you could sort such an arrangement out. What I did to manage my burnout was a bit drastic, but it was much needed and it felt right for me. And that was resigning and taking a long break. But before I resigned and before I had left work, I decided to travel for 3 weeks. I went to Bali for a few weeks, and where I completely was able to disconnect. And now I'm back home spending summer with my family. And trust me, there's a huge difference between a break of 3 weeks and that of a 1 week, which we are typically used to. The amount of disconnect, relaxation, fun, and peace you will feel when you take a long break is just not comparable, and you need it. And when I took that break and was in Bali, I posted about the importance of taking a break so that we could avoid a burnout. And I actually got a response from one of my followers suggesting that taking a long break could make you lazy. But honestly, not at all. Taking a long break has given me the energy to persevere and the inspiration right now to create things and put that energy back into my podcast and into my passion projects and into my next job. That's my personal experience. It might be different for different people, but I would suggest taking a long break, not a 1 week holiday that is given to us by work. A second solution is to seek help. Go to therapy. Find a therapist who specializes in corporate burnout. There's a lot of these therapists that are available to you online today, and online therapy is seamless, it's accessible, so you don't need to go out of your way to seek help. I did that back in 2020 when I was experiencing some extreme anxiety at work. I sought therapy and I sought online help, and my performance has shifted drastically because of that experience, because I was able to process and understand some of the emotions that I was going through. So there's no shame in seeking therapy. If you feel like you're in a space where you're burning out, then that might be a solution or an avenue that you might need to consider. Number 3 is exercising mindfulness, meaning meditation, yoga, breathing exercises. And if you could integrate that and have it be as part of your lifestyle, that's even better. Because what this does is it acts as a break for your emotional and physical systems, and it can help you release some of the tensions that you are holding on to. Since we typically spend our days on the go, non-stop, back-to-back meetings, activities, social outings, and we don't give ourselves enough of a break. We don't actually spend enough time with ourselves doing these mindful exercises as we should. And I actually used to do that every morning at work. I used to go to a prayer room that we had in our office, and I used to do a 10-minute meditation or a 10-minute breathing exercise before I start work, just to kind of take the edge off. Lastly, getting enough sleep. That's a very important factor. It's a factor that we typically overlook. Make sure you do that. But to be honest, I'd be lying to you if I say that that's something that I have mastered. I still struggle till this day with being able to get enough sleep. But if you can crack the code on sleep, then you're on the right path to help ease some of the tension that you are facing in your daily life. In conclusion, if you're feeling emotionally drained and unable to keep up with life's incessant demands, mainly because of your overly stressful work environments, then you absolutely should examine your situation and do something about it, especially if it's been a long-term situation. Only you can save yourself out of a burnout, no one else. And the first step needs to come from you, whether that be a conversation, seeking help, changing your lifestyle. You are the driver of your life, and you have to essentially pull yourself out of this situation. I hope this video shed some consciousness to some of the symptoms and drivers that could lead to a burnout. Take care of yourselves always, because if you don't show up to yourselves the way you deserve, then you won't be able to show up to your world the way it deserves. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and see you on the next one.
Hope you enjoyed this episode and that you were able to pick up a thing or two that could help you on your journey of growth. If you would like to hear more conversations like these, please do subscribe on YouTube or through your preferred podcast platform. You can also follow more content and get in touch with me on Instagram at oneday.thepodcast. Till next time.